Hey guys, this is Pablo with Meditation Amsterdam, and in today's topic I want to give my take on a question that I see coming up in the YouTube sphere. Certain videos pondering about this question, or also in the comment section saying, well, I wonder if I'm the narcissist. And the question comes up from people who have been in relationships with narcissistic people and have felt like many of those traits have rubbed off on them, or see the lists of attitudes, feelings, emotional states that describe narcissists, and they start to realize that they tick a lot of the boxes, and they go, wait a second, this sounds a lot like me. And then we naturally start to wonder, hey, wait a moment, have I got it backwards here? I thought I was perhaps the victim of emotional abuse, but maybe I'm the one who's been narcissistic all along. And part of the reason that this topic fascinates me is I believe that the traditional psychology community has all but hit an impasse when it comes to knowing what to do about narcissism. I think it's way outside of the purview of what they can solve because of the way they see the human psyche, and because they don't really have access to the knowledge, the understanding, and the states of mind and integration that are created through the more perennial or spiritual type of practices. And because they don't have access to these things and to those understandings, the entire field that discusses narcissism is to my mind, misdiagnosing the problem, and therefore cannot possibly find a solution to any of it. So I thought I would do a video to give my take on this based on some studies that I've been doing, and especially based on a book that I'm reviewing over several episodes called The Pearl Beyond Price. I made the last installment yesterday, which is number 7, and if it sounds interesting to you, there's a playlist on the channel called The Pearl Beyond Price, which is a book by A.H. Almaas. Now, to explain what my general take on this, I will give it away off the bat and then try to elaborate on it. So my current take on the topic is that regardless what pop psychology or the YouTube sphere may tell you, or maybe even traditional psychology may tell you, we are all in a fundamentally narcissistic state of mind, so long as we identify with our egoic individuality. And that is not necessarily what we hear out there, right? We hear that narcissists are people who meet certain criteria, which is particularly low levels of empathy, a natural tendency to gaslight and mislead, an empty schizoid core, and so on. And my understanding, based again on mainly spiritual reading that I've done, study and self-practice, is that this is not entirely correct, that we're talking more about everyone who is coming from an egoic sense of identity being fundamentally narcissistic, whether that expresses itself as diagnosable or not. And so we are talking more of degrees of narcissism rather than whether you are completely free of being a narcissist or not. And those degrees don't start at 0. They actually start a lot further from 0 than we may want to admit to ourselves. And that it's only when you get to the really high levels that then we start talking about personality disorder and a diagnosable disorder, mental disorder. So what do I mean then by being fundamentally narcissistic? Well, to explain this, we need to understand what the ego is. and why our identification with the egoic structures of the mind make us fundamentally narcissistic until they are outgrown, which in spirituality is called an awakening. Perhaps the most spiritually flavored of psychologists, which are, I think, the Jungians, although now you have also transcendental psychology or post-Jungian psychology. They would tend to call it not so much awakening, but they would call it true individuation, right? Now, regardless of what we call it, it is the essential dropping of the sense of individual self as the primary way in which our mind operates, as the marker of whether you are still in narcissistic egoic mode or not. And again, to understand why this would be the case, you could say that it is because of what the ego structure is. In several videos in the past, I have tried to explain, and also in the Pearl Beyond Price series, how the ego comes about. In essence, the ego is a mental outgrowth which results as part and parcel of the mental development that we undergo as human beings from the moment we're born, and perhaps even before that, right? And it is an outgrowth that does a number of things. For one thing, it is preoccupied with understanding the environment and making a separation between ourselves and that environment. In other words, it creates a rift in the mind, or a duality of subject and object, which could be more accurately described as subject versus object. And the versus comes in because for the ego, the environment is something against which we need to protect ourselves and from which we need to procure satisfaction or safety, gratification, validation. The entire mechanism of the ego and the very split between subject and object brings with it that relationship of subject versus object. Already from that point on, you can see that so long as the subject-object divide is present in our psyche, in our minds, we are, in fact, in a narcissistic relationship with the environment. Half the time feeling afraid of it, half the time feeling like we need to procure validation from that environment, which in narcissistic terms would be called narcissistic supply. And a lot of the time ignoring everything that falls in between. So anything that is not seen as good or bad is seen as not only neutral but completely irrelevant. Therefore, it's also a very impoverishing way to navigate reality. A very low resolution, contentious relationship with reality. You can also tell that when this split happens, the real self, the actual core of the human being, becomes obscured by that split. It never really goes away because your core real self, your core nature, can never really be lost, but it can certainly become obscured. And that obscuration is as good as if it was lost. In other words, the egoic splits that we create in our mind, starting with the subject-object split, obscure our wholeness of self, and then our core can be in fact called schizoid the moment that happens, even though the real self, as I said, is never truly lost. But it is obscured to such a degree, and this obscuration is not just a mental or psychological phenomenon, but it's an obscuration that literally creates rifts or cuts in our psychosomatics, to the point where by the time we get to adulthood, there's a very good chance we are completely cut off from the neck down. The body is seen as a kind of thing that takes us around, which needs to be kept healthy and which needs to be given pleasure and comfort, but it is rarely seen as a source of information and life that sustain the operations of the mind. We are therefore cut off neurologically from a great part of ourselves. And this being the case, our core is schizoid, as a matter of fact. It is just not seen as such by psychology, because in psychology, or at least traditional psychology, so long as the mind operates in a non-narcissistic way, and you are, carrying yourself with enough empathy and the rest of it, then nothing seems to be wrong. Where in reality, the actual core of the individual is completely obscured, utterly obscured, and therefore the individual is on a constant search for gratification, even if that search for gratification takes wholesome vehicles and wholesome patterns in which it expresses itself. So we are here not so much talking about whether people are narcissistic because they act like, quote unquote, a narcissist. We are talking here about a much more fundamental level, in which so long as you are seeking your core self because you can't feel it, you are fundamentally narcissistic. And it is just a matter of time for you to come in contact with another narcissist, for all those traits to suddenly be elicited in you. And then you say, well, their narcissism rubbed off on me. Well, it's like Velcro, right? Unless there was a receiving end, a sticky end to the other side, then the Velcro would have nothing to stick on. So your psyche is full of muck, and that's why narcissistic traits rub off when you are in the wrong environment or in relationships with narcissistic type or fully diagnosed people. It also highlights a lot of the things that traditional psychology says that are obscurations of this fact. Just yesterday, I was talking about neediness in this episode 7 from The Pearl Beyond Price, and how traditional psychology talks about healthy attachment as a way to say, well, look, you can be unhealthily attached, in which case you are avoidant or random, or you're this, you're that. But if you're healthily attached, then you're okay. And healthy attachment is a great way to sweep under the rug the fact, or rather the question of, why do you need to be attached in the first place? What's the deal with that? What's the need that's being fulfilled with that? And then, of course, we'll be told that, well, companionship and being social is a core human need and the rest of it, which is all good and great. But if you look a little bit closer at a lot of relationships, which psychology, maybe most relationships with psychology would call healthy attachments, what you would find is people who attached and clung onto another because there are fears of loneliness that are very profound and also very repressed. And the same might be said about financial success, for example. Going out there and being somebody, right? Getting things done, being assertive, proactive, and the rest of it. And the question is, what is this need to accumulate? Right? The yogic literature is filled with parables, examples, and admonitions at this idea that you only feel that you need to accumulate when there is a fundamental fear that you don't have the generative capacity to need little and produce what you need to get on with life and have a roof over your head and meal at your table. So this whole acquisitiveness that is hidden behind the desire to succeed could be seen as a similar thing. And the same goes for trying to make a mark in the world, right? To become important or leave a legacy behind, something that others will remember you for, and all this kind of business, all these sort of what you could call infinity projects or things that outlive you. And that could be seen or potentially could hide tremendous fear of death and annihilation. So in a sense, many of the things that traditional psychology would consider the signs of being a healthy, functional human being, when seen from the eyes of the perennial philosophies and spirituality, can be a great ruse or a great mental tactic, and a successful mental tactic at never having to visit very deep and horrendous fears of death, annihilation, loneliness, poverty, sickness, and things of that kind. And you don't need to look very far in modern society to realize that we have made it our entire way of life in modern society to create lifestyles in which you never have to face these fears. In other words, lifestyles in which you can remain a child. And look at our politicians. Look at our business leaders. Look at what are supposed to be adults running the show. And look closely at how much fear-driven they are in their decision-making, in the way that they conduct themselves and create so much conflict and violence towards one another. Mostly emotional. We are very covert in our violence. Violence now takes, you hardly go out in the street and punch somebody in the face. You'll sue them. You'll sue them for their money. Yeah, you'll try to bury them in paperwork or in legalities or things of that kind in order to inflict pain and acquire something, to feel like you won't be, you won't be the victim in the situation or things of that kind. So violence has taken a very refined form in society, and success and love have become amazing and validated, socially and psychologically validated ways, so that you never have to look at your actually schizoid core. So you never have to contend with deep and horrific human fears that are part and parcel of the human experience, which ought to be faced and transcended if you are to conduct yourself not from fear, but actually from a sense of completeness, love, and harmony. So the essence of the video was not so much to make a critique on modern society, although I think we are in real trouble, or politics, God forbid. It wasn't even to make a critique about modern psychology, but I cannot explain this other than in reference to, because much of our paradigm about whether we are narcissists or not comes from modern psychology telling you, listen, if you conduct yourself in a nice way, you try your best, and you are a constructive, creative human being, then you're not a narcissist. And you may not be a diagnosable narcissist, I'll give him that much. I mean, there's a lot of very productive, creative people that are great to hang out with. And yet there is a narcissistic core, but needs to be rubbed the wrong way for it to immediately arise. And you see people immediately becoming nasty and act in either very greedy or covertly violent ways or manipulating ways. All these come from the very same place. It comes from a narcissistic core that has not been eliminated because the vehicles for growth are difficult to understand, not that available, and actually negated by the social and the traditionally psychological narrative. So I'm actually very curious to hear what your experiences have been with this, and whether the take that I share on the topic is recognizable for you. And as usual, if you believe that these topics and the way that they are explained in this channel are beneficial to others, then your liking, sharing, and subscribing makes the channel far more visible and available. It's also very motivating to me, and I'll be back with more videos pretty soon. Until then, cheerio, and thanks for listening. Bye-bye.